Hi, my name is Clemmons, and this is part 2 of the two-part series, Formative and Summative Assessments for Dummies Like Me. When last we left off, we were discussing the differences between formative and summative assessments by looking at their characteristics and advantages. Now we're going to take a look at the summative assessments, and the key to these is to answer the question, how do I know, as a learner, when I've arrived? We'll continue to use the GPS as our metaphor to communicate this method of assessment. So the first characteristic, of course, is the target objectives. The end state, the final destination. How does a student know that he or she has arrived there? And that's what summative assessments do. They target those objectives. Much like a GPS will say, you've reached your final destination, an assessment should say the same thing to a student. And we should always use multiple sources or measures. GPS, for example, will use various satellites to get wayward points that tell us where we're at and how far we've come and when we've reached our final destination. The same thing is true from a learner in an academic environment. So an instructor, for example, can use tests, discussion boards, debates, or narrative writing assignments just as examples. And so the important thing here is that the sources are used and they're multiple and they have different measures among them. And they each need to have weighted components. Sometimes particular methods can tell us more about how far a student has come on the learning journey than others. For example, writing a paper or having a discussion board may be more valuable to assess the learner's end state than having them do a knowledge-based test. Also, no matter the source, no matter the weighted component, they all need to be comprehensive in nature. A complete picture of just how far the student has come to affirm for them and the institution that they have reached the final destination. So to look at these characteristics, we can't help but note that there are some advantages to summative assessments. And the first is they're just necessary for the institution and for the learner. The second is they promote accountability from the institution. How do we know, for example, that a student has actually reached the objective of a course? How do we know they've reached the standards of behavior that are required? Well, that's what summative assessments do. They tell us as an institution that a student has made it. They've reached their final destination. And they always assess some form of instructional activity. Much like a GPS has got to do a pretty good job of communicating to a driver how far they are along a path and when they reach the final destination, the same thing is true for summative assessments. They need to be able to assess how well an instructor has done as it relates to student learning. So in terms of that, we want to invite active engagement at all times, even in the end state of summative assessments. It's always a good idea for students to look at their summative assessments and get some feedback from that process that will help them learn as they progress into the future with what they've learned. So now we review summative assessments. Let's take a look back at where we've been so far on this journey. We took a look at formative and summative assessments, and the key question we looked at for formative assessments is, how do I know how I'm doing? And the summative assessments tell us how we know when we've arrived. By using both of these assessments, and learning their characteristics and advantages, and understand the difference between them, we can be better educators when it comes to our students. And like any learner, we always want to show the references we use to create. And so here are the references I used to create this background presentation.